All right. Hopefully you can see and hear me. Everything's looking all right at this end. I'm just going to wait, keep an eye on the chat, see if you could just sound off there and let me know if you're here, if you can see and hear me. So I guess welcome to the garage. Those of you who are fans of Writopolis will not have seen this before, but you'll know that this is where I record a lot of my podcast work and the Writopolis live show that I do with RJ and Scott. Well, this is what it looks like. This is the garage. Pragmatically, it's Sunday night. The family needed telly, so I had to come out here. But to be honest, I'm glad to, because I think it's a really it is actually kind of a nice environment for what we're about to do. So just to let you know what's going on, this is a live reading event for My Life in Horror. Obviously, it's the final week of the crowdfunder, and I'm really hoping that'll end strong. But regardless, My Life in Horror on Ginger Nuts is coming to an end, and I just wanted to do something a bit special for the very final essay. And I wasn't initially going to do this one. I'd already figured out where I wanted the series to end, but I got the idea in my head to do this, and I found I just couldn't quite resist, really. So as a result, I've written this final essay, and I thought it would be nice to do it as a live reading, just as a kind of one-off, because it's the last one. Obviously, Jim will post it up on the site, the written version, in the next day or two, schedule permitting. But I thought it would be a good thing to do, to actually have, for those of you who are willing to turn up like you are on a Sunday evening, God bless every single one of you for being here. Thank you. I thought it'd be nice to do it as a live reading, as a kind of make it a bit of an event out of it, because My Life in Horror has been a big part of my life now for for 8 years, and I just thought it'd be nice to do something a little bit special here at the end. So sorry, I'm feeling a bit spaced out, to be honest. But I'm all right. So I think what I'll do, if it's all right with all of you, is I'm gonna actually crack on, and then hopefully, if it all goes all right, we can do some question and answer and chat stuff afterwards. Happy to talk to all of you about My Life in Horror and the process and how it's been. But I think just so that we're, just to get it done, I think I'm going to start in with the reading now. So yeah, so welcome to the final ever My Life in Horror essay, and welcome to hearing it first. So here we go. It's going up on screen. Always a bit of a risky proposition, this, the encore that you're not sure anyone's really asking for. Then again, if the chap who's written 60 essays about the idiosyncratic works that messed him up as a kid, for the sheer unhinged joy of it, is starting to worry about coming over self-indulgent, probably best to acknowledge that particular horse has not just bolted, but fled to another country where it lives under an assumed identity and has raised a family of foals with little of any idea of what daddy did in the war. Anyhow, this whole project has been about jumping off a cliff, honestly. Learning to write nonfiction, learning to write criticism and autobiography, sitting down at the keyboard and figuring out why I felt strongly enough about, say, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or the Escape from Colditz board game to commit an evening and a few thousand words to talking about it. And then there was the crowdfunder, and now this crowdfunder. And at the time of writing, I don't know if it's been successful, because for reasons that will become clear, I'm writing this a little bit ahead of publication. Did it land? Will Volume 2 get a mass market release and a limited edition pressing? Who knows? So far, so good, said the falling man. The view is so beautiful, all the way down. Still, thanks for coming this far, all of you who have. And let me beg your indulgence to take one last trip down memory lane. It's 1997, so I must be 19 years old, and my memory is that I'm in a W.H. Smith's, possibly Christmas shopping on a painful budget. But it's me and a bookshop, so the odds of my not picking up something for myself are always pretty damn low. They plummet to zero when I see the cover. I have no familiarity with the author. That is one hell of a title. And is there a Barker or King cover quote? Maybe. Something certainly draws me in, enough to part with some incredibly limited discretionary spending budget from my job seeker's allowance. Interestingly, I remember no especial fear or trepidation. The author and the narrative were both unknown to me, unlike some past entries where reputations preceded. Anyway, I was a veteran of it and the Wasp Factory and Hellraiser. How bad could it get, really? And so I dived straight in with nary a thought to how deep, dark, and cold things were about to get. And it starts off so slow, oddly, almost low key. Sure, our narrator is a serial killer, but he's in jail at the end of his career. And I remember wondering if this was going to be one of those told in reverse type deals where we learn about the crimes via flashback, safe in the knowledge that it all ends in a cell. And then almost immediately it gets really fucking weird. Turns out our man has taught himself how to put himself into a coma, indistinguishable from death, and he can do it so successfully that he wakes up in the prison morgue. It's an incredible piece of writing, describing the process from the inside, backing right up to the very edge of the supernatural, before taking a hard right into Silence of the Lambs territory as our narrator effects a bloody, daring escape. And then suddenly we're in New Orleans, and it's like going from monochrome to technicolor as the palette and cast expand like the opening minutes of a Big Bang. And I have absolutely no idea what is going on, but the author has my attention, and I am here for it. And then, while our man is cruising the quarter looking for likely victims, he encounters a fellow predator. There's a moment when they meet, I've never forgotten it, where our narrator shakes hands and, in a gesture he tells us he's used countless times as a way of gauging someone's potential as a submissive victim, moves his hand down to briefly encircle the other man's wrist. Only this time, the shakee does the same thing. I am doing the moment painfully insufficient justice here because Poppy C. Brite is a world class horror author, brilliant at pretty much every aspect of novel writing, from characterization to voice to description to plot to emotion. So please just trust me. It's a hairs on the back of your neck moment for the ages, and nothing's even happened yet. But I remember feeling with a moral certainty that shit was about to go down. I was very much not wrong. Before it does, though, the novel cuts away and we meet recently split up Lucas and Tran. Lucas becomes an instantly totemic character for 19-year-old me. When we meet him, he's ranting and raving on a pirate radio station, angrily condemning straight people as breeders, with a persona called Lush Rimbaud. It quickly becomes apparent that he's furious because he's HIV positive, and this is why he split from Tran, and he's determined to articulate that fury in a world where a plague that seems to only kill gay men is treated as something between a minor inconvenience and a blessing. Lucas is not a good person. His anger often spills into outright violence, and during his darkest, most self-pitying moment, he comes perilously close to infecting Tran with his own blood. A fantastic example of toxic romanticism that has some eerie echoes with the flowering relationship between the two killers. I've literally just realized as I type this. Nonetheless, this guy really spoke to me. Excuse me. This guy really spoke to me, responding to the brutal injustices life had dealt him with a defiant spit and fury that felt honestly come by, if a little indiscriminate in expression. Not the first time I felt the pull of such a figure, of course, as you'll all be well aware if you've come this far. You know, I'm really not feeling so good. Anyway, and then there's this Tran whose situation is less immediately mortal, but no less gut wrenching. As we meet him, he's in the process of becoming homeless, thrown out by his parents after they discover that he's gay. A major part of the brutality comes from the matter of fact way Tran absorbs this. He's always known that if they found out, he'd be kicked to the curb. And his stoicism in the face of loss and ostracism is honestly kind of heartbreaking. Then I learn, with a dreadful sinking feeling, that Tran not only knows the New Orleans based killer, but intends to throw himself at his mercy, imagining he might be able to stay with him, at least for a while. It's a brutal twist of the narrative knife, creating huge tension from the reader, an awful sense of impending doom, an inexorable pulling together of darkness and innocence that... Oh, oh, yes, I see. Sorry, I knew this was getting a bit risky. I've stayed too long. I pushed it too hard. Thanks for coming this far, but I'm going to have to leave it there. Sorry. I know it's a bit abrupt, but I suspect it will be for the best. It's the end. But the moment has been prepared for.
Whoa, what a rush, eh? It's, oh, God, you don't want to do that every day, I can tell you. Oh, it's a bit different. It's very different, actually. Oh, but the hair. Oh, there's a lot less of it. Oh, and the voice. The voice. Actually, you know, I think I rather like the voice. I'm going to keep that, definitely. Whoa, the shirt. That's a loud shirt, right? Might keep the shirt too. Anywho, where were we? Ah, yes. Innocence and darkness. It's a strange thing to say of any character in this book, indeed of any in Billy Martin / Poppy Z. Brite's work, but insofar as innocence exists in this world, it exists in Tran. And that doesn't mean, by the by, that the child is sinless, certainly not from the perspective of the aggressively heteronormative culture in which he operates. He, like so many of us, is a child and victim of his forebears' misunderstandings, one of the many lonely, disconnected, queer children of the early 1990s, seeking out acceptance, affection and fraternity wherever he can find it, indeed wherever we can find it. Like all of Exquisite Corpse's cast, he is a hedonist, a sensual creature of sex and aesthetic beauty, of casual narcotic consumption and stray relationships. To the average, straight, cisgender reader of the era, Tran's motif of innocence might well have proven baffling. But to those of us that bleed and weep rainbows, it's heartbreaking in its earnestness. Tran is the very icon of children many of us older queers, yeah, and I am one of those older queers, I'm afraid, getting there anyway, edging into daddy territory, with some grace, I've got to say, you know, I'm not doing too badly, the regeneration has helped. No, and that we once were the hedonistic congregation of orphans, the outcast and exiled from our family hearts by dint of our natures, forced to seek and carve community from our fellow strays, the lovers, exes and siblings we find for ourselves in neon limbo. His innocence isn't founded in some Christianic virginity or prescribed ignorance. For a young man of his age, he's already a cynic by many standards, having known and lost love many times, having experienced losses and traumas, not to mention the pleasures and revelations that many of his straight brothers and sisters will likely never know. His innocence, just like the darkness that ultimately consumes it, is explicitly, achingly queer. His appetites, his free and easy sensuality aren't antithetical to it, but essential and exquisite. In the wake of the long collective trauma left on the LGBTQ psyche by the AIDS epidemic, and our abandonment to it by societies and systems that were only too happy to have rid of us by any means, queer communities adopted angelic motifs in many of our panoply and symbolism, much to the chagrin of our traditional enemies. Tran manifests that symbolism in so many ways. A child of the late 1980s, only just blossomed into adulthood in the 1990s, he's old enough to feel the lingering morbid resonance of the disease, to be afraid of it, yet to have just avoided the plague-like pestilence that beset his forebears in the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s. In that, Tran is us, the queer readers who share a similar birthday, who are also children of the 1980s and 1990s, for whom the disease and its effects are both hideous reality and morbid myth. He is our blitheness and disconnection, our troubled positioning within our family units, our demonisation by the popular media and cynical scapegoating political forces. And what happens to him is thus so much more than just another murder in a horror novel. It is the witless, unthinking consumption and desecration of something beautiful. Something emblematic of tomorrow's beauty, the innocence and state of grace that might be possible in years to come. That Tran is so atrociously undone, ostensibly by members of his own tribe, is perhaps the most trenchant misanthropy. Here are men old enough to have suffered everything Tran was spared, to have been outcast, demonised, diseased, beaten, abused, who, in the case of Dennis Nilsson-inspired Andrew Compton, is a victim of the AIDS epidemic himself. But that, as a result of their natures, are blind to Tran's innocence, or, to put it more accurately, perceive that innocence as a wolf might the weakness of the lamb. In their own cruel, peculiar, twisted ways, the atrocities they wreak upon Tran, from their betrayal of him to the cuts, bites and incisions that ultimately unravel him, are acts of reverence, acknowledgements of that essential innocence that straight culture cannot even perceive. They would not have selected him to be so intimately their victim were that not the case. But rather than love and adore him, as any halfway sane queer soul absolutely would, their affections are expressed in the manner of cats having cornered some rare and exotic bird. They are such twisted, diseased, and execrable examples of the human animal. The only way that they can express their appreciation is through sadism and cannibal consumption. To them, the moment is one of supreme love and religious observance even, transcendent in its sensual intensity, infernal in consequence. That Martin/Brite invites us to share not only Tran's despair and pain, the black murder of his innocence, but also the demonic ecstasies of his killers, is the contradictory soul of this book made explicit. Throughout, but nowhere more so than in this heartbreaking crescendo, Martin/Brite revels in the sensual intensity of both, drawing no distinction between the excesses to be found in sex or murder. It's a Luciferian relationship this book draws with its readers, queer or otherwise, inviting us to share the souls of the most tainted human beings imaginable, to revel in their strange appetites, the undoing of innocence, and the cannibal consumption of beauty, to understand them as we understand ourselves in our darkest and most nihilistic moments. In that, the book is an excoriating condemnation of the politics and cultural circumstances that provide both the breeding and hunting grounds for this strange sadistic species. Tran, along with every victim of Andrew Compton and Jay Byrne, are as much victims of the societies to which they are born as they are the killers themselves. And nowhere is that made more explicit than in the book's closing chapters, in which Martin/Brite actively recreates an actual scenario that occurred during the height of Jeffrey Dahmer's killing spree amongst the gay community of Milwaukee throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. Having barely escaped Jay's sadistic clutches, Tran stumbles naked, drugged and bleeding down the street, only to be met by two police officers who actively hand Tran back into his tormentor's custody with very little in the way of convincing, and then proceed to beat the only man who might have saved him senseless. This is not only a thinly veiled reference to a very similar situation that occurred with Dahmer's underage victim, Konorak's synthasomophone, but also a metaphor for our status as queer children in cultures either indifferent to our brutalisation or actively engaged in cultivating it. For all of Martin/Brite's gleeful descent into the abyss of Byrne and Compton's sadism, there is a righteous fury kindling in every sentence and syllable of this book that readers definitely don't have to be queer to understand, but that speaks to us directly, drawing echoes with our lived experience so acutely it is often as traumatic and painful an experience as it is arousing and sensual. Yet, the better part of that fury isn't for the serial killers themselves. Monstrous as they are, Brite/Martin finds the humanity, even the vulnerability, in these most inhumane of individuals. They are merely symptoms of wider societal sickness, as much products of circumstances beyond their control as any of us. Indeed, Andrew Compton in particular evinces deep descents into internal abysses, where he loses himself in existential considerations as to his nature and alien appetites. The author's fury finds expression in Transformer Lover, the writer and AIDS victim Lucas Ransom. If there is an author insert in this book, a character who manifests the raw anger and abandonment of older generations of queer men in the early 1990s, it's Lucas. Whilst technically trans X, Lucas hails from a prior generation of gay men, one whose hedonistic legacy is well drawn and detailed in the book, and for which he has paid far too high a price. Considering himself amongst the walking dead, a creature as in despair of his existence as, perversely, Byrne and Compton are as in love with theirs, Lucas is a creature of violent passions, the outcast child in all of us, railing at the injustice of society and creation as a whole. He has little but contempt for the culture that has reduced him to his current circumstances, and indeed condemns him for what he is, loves and suffers. Unlike Tran, who is our innocence, Lucas is the romantic opposite, a walking avatar of bleaker queer experience that cannot help but destroy what it loves more than anything else in the world. The desolation of Lucas Ransom, his impotent, violent fury at the world, is something any queer reader will relate to. Unlike Tran, he's also a manifestation of that, to heteronormative culture, most troubling of queer characters, the one who conforms to no particular prescription or stereotype. Unlike Angel Boy Tran, who is identifiable from a glance, Lucas is rugged, masculine and physically imposing, the kind of gay man that straight women have a marked tendency to fall in love with, and, in extreme cases, be offended by his manifest disinterest. He is the self-defined splinter in the flank of prescriptive culture. He refuses the places and slots society grudgingly allows for us, seeking to, often traumatically, carve out his own from its necrotic flesh. In this, he is inevitably punished. If there is a character in the book whose desolation has no rock bottom, who exemplifies the depths of disgrace culture will submit us to if we allow it, it's Lucas. By the end of the narrative, he is one of the last men standing, but only, as Andrew Compton almost supernaturally sniffs out, because he doesn't want to be, because he has nothing left but suffering, despair, and a loveless death waiting for him. Lucas is our suicidal ideation and self-destructive rage, our broken, jagged spirits, and the danger that is born from our near-constant cultural abuse. It's little wonder that he seeks balm in the arms of Tran, whose innocence is his contrasting opposite, the sober yin to his furious yang, that their story together, the lost love that still flickers, despite circumstances conspiring to smother it, ends in the bleakest tragedy, is Martin/Brite's commentary on and condemnation of the disgrace that tradition and conservative culture would submit us all to, if it had license, and a stark reminder that the fight is far from over. That such a book even exists that a writer such as Billy Martin / Poppy Z Brite has license as a gay trans man to write about our collective experience in such an intimate, flagrant and sincere manner was a revelation to me, and continues to be so. Like Barker before him, Martin / Brite blew apart my preconceptions of what is possible in fiction, and inspired me to write with a sincerity that cannot help but make the reader share our passions, no matter what form they may take. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to that essay. If you'd like to come and chat to us about this video, about the essay itself, about what's going on with My Life in Horror, links down below. Come and have a chat with us. You are more than welcome. Until next time, bye-bye.